what is it? Good morning, good noon. I want to thank FIME for inviting me to talk to you this morning about the Iranian nuclear issue. I'm actually going to be talking mainly about what's going on in the Trump administration with regard to the ongoing nuclear crisis, because I think that's where the main action is right now. I think President Trump is trying to advance a specific agenda with regard to the nuclear deal. So I want to try to lay out the contours of the Trump administration's policy towards Iran and specifically towards the nuclear deal. So since Trump became president, I'm sure you all noticed there's been an abrupt about-face with regard to the Iranian nuclear issue. President Trump has taken, 180-degree position from the Obama administration with regard to this deal. On the campaign trail, we heard Trump saying that this is, the worst deal ever, and he will tear it up as one of the first things he does as president. I don't think anybody really took that threat literally, but I think he did project that he is not happy with the Iran nuclear deal and that we're likely to see a different approach to the deal and to Iran, and that is indeed what we have seen. The first step taken on Iran was about 10 days into his presidency, and this was in response to an Iranian missile test at the end of January last year, 2017. And the response of the Trump administration was swift and decisive through rhetoric and also through action. So the rhetoric came mainly from National Security Advisor Flynn, who was ousted, I think, 2 weeks later. And what Flynn said was, we are putting you on notice, Iran. And this was a sharp shift in the rhetoric. And it projected a new approach that we have seen continue throughout the first year of Trump's presidency, putting Iran on notice. And by the way, words have meaning. Sometimes, President Trump is accused of, only knowing to talk the talk, but not to walk the walk. So he's been talking tough on Iran, but he hasn't done much. And, we can debate whether that's the case or not, but I think it's important to point out that talk also matters, okay? Through words, you can change realities on the ground, just like we saw with the declaration with regard to Jerusalem, for example. That's just an example of how, through a statement, you actually change realities. So that was the rhetoric from Flynn, and the action taken was sanctions on a number of people that are involved in Iran's missile program. At the time, many said, well, Obama also put sanctions on Iran for missile tests, but there were some differences in 2015 as compared to 2017. First of all, in 2015, when Iran violated UN Security Council Resolution 1929 that was still in effect at the time, it was a clear violation of the resolution, and still it took Obama 3 months to place sanctions on the Iranians. In this case, there was already a new resolution in place, 2231, with watered down provisions regarding Iran's missile program. And the reaction was immediate. So the Trump administration was projecting that they're not taking seriously the watered down provisions in the new resolution. They still view this missile test as a violation, and the sanctions came within a day or two, not 3 months. The next important mark in terms of the new administration's approach to Iran came in April last year. And this was when Trump was first called upon to certify the Iran nuclear deal. Now, obviously, this created a problem for the Trump administration. The legislation, according to which every 90 days the American president has to certify the Iran nuclear deal, was legislation put in place during the Obama administration, and it was for, with a good reason. It was supposed to say, well, every 90 days we're going to check what the situation is, and if it's not good, we can decertify. So that was supposed to protect America in the face of this nuclear deal. However, for Trump, it created a problem because Trump is not happy with the deal, and yet there were no real grounds for decertifying, especially since Trump had not yet articulated his policy on Iran and on the deal. So he certified the deal, and he was immediately criticized for an incoherent, inconsistent approach on Iran. Here he certified that Iran is upholding the deal, and on the other hand, he says this is the worst deal in history. So, how do those two messages come together? Well, in understanding the administration, what you need to understand is, first of all, he had to certify because every 90 days the president needs to certify. And second of all, Iran complying with the nuclear deal, and by the way, Iran hadn't been in full compliance with the deal. There had been some minor violations. Moreover, not everything in the Iran deal is under the purview of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and this is important to know. So every time you read in the media when it says, but the IAEA has said Iran is in full compliance with the deal, well, the IAEA has a lot of responsibility for monitoring the deal, but there are parts of the deal that it's not under the purview of the IAEA. For example, there's a procurement working group that was set up as part of the deal in order to make sure that Iran doesn't procure technologies and components that can be useful in a nuclear weapons program. The IAEA has nothing to do with the procurement working group, and indeed there's German intelligence, and there was German intelligence at the time, that Iran had made tens of attempts to procure know-how and components that could be useful in a nuclear weapons program. And that was discussed, perhaps, in the procurement working group. I say perhaps because we don't know. The discussions in the procurement working group are confidential. Another problem with the deal, the confidentiality. But in any case, the IAEA has nothing to do with that. So when you hear the IAEA says Iran is in compliance, we don't know. Perhaps Iran is in more compliance, but there are aspects that it's not for the IAEA to say. In any case, the Trump administration is almost had to certify, still did not like the deal. So Trump instructed Tillerson the very next day to come out with a statement on what the Trump administration's approach is to the deal. And Tillerson actually laid out the broad contours of the Trump administration policy that we later heard more fully in October of last year. Basically, what Tillerson said is that because the deal does not prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear state, all of Iran's activities in the missile realm in the Middle East, all its aggressions, its rhetoric, what it's doing in the Gulf to American sailors and ships, all of this is relevant to the nuclear issue as well. In other words, when the Trump administration looks at Iran and devises Iran policy, it's looking at everything, not just the JCPOA, not just the nuclear deal. It's a comprehensive view of Iran. And again, this was a clear break with the Obama administration, which had said always, we're separating the issues. We're dealing with the nuclear, all the rest. We know Iran is doing bad stuff, but we don't intend to deal with it. So Tillerson made very clear that the Trump administration will deal with everything. Another important thing that Tillerson said is he brought North Korea into the conversation. And remember, North Korea is moving forward in parallel, much more advanced than Iran, already a nuclear state, threatening the United States. And Tillerson said, we, the Trump administration, will not kick this problem down the road to the next president, which is what was done with the North Korean problem. He said, we got the North Korean problem in our lap after it had not been dealt with well by previous administrations. That's with an S. It includes Clinton, Bush, and Obama. We're not going to kick this down the road. We are going to deal with the Iranian nuclear issue. No, we're going to deal with the Iranian nuclear issue. We're not going to kick it down the road like was done with the North Korean issue. As I said, the next big event was October 13th when we heard the full Iran policy from Trump himself. Again, the nuclear and other aspects are linked. He talked about the main problems with the deal as the Trump administration sees them. And of course, he targeted the IRGC. And Iran's support for terror. That was a big thing, and designating the IRGC and their connection to terror. He also said in that speech that in order to address the problems in the JCPOA, he will need cooperation. He will need cooperation from Congress in order to advance new U.S. legislation, and he will need cooperation with European allies. He didn't even talk about Russia and China because I think it's pretty clear that Russia and China are not candidates to budge in any respect on this issue. January 12th, Trump made another speech on this issue after not really getting cooperation either from Congress or from the Europeans. And on January 12th, he dropped the bomb, right, the rhetorical bomb. And that was when he said, this is the last time that I'm certifying the Iran deal. But sorry, he didn't certify the deal. In October already, he didn't certify, but he was still waiving the sanctions, which keeps the deal alive. So he decertified, but kept the sanctions. On January 12th, he said, this is the last time I'm going to give the waiver on the sanctions, which in effect means that the United States would leave the deal. So the threat is now on the table that if by May 12th there's not real cooperation that leads to a changed approach in the U.S. and with European allies, Trump will leave the deal. And the question is, what is happening now? So what we've seen, and I'm going to wrap up very soon, what we've seen is that this threat actually has had the effect of creating some movement. Europeans obviously do not want the United States to leave the deal. They want to keep the deal intact. And this has convinced them to enter into more serious conversations with the Trump administration over the JCPOA and over the problems that the Trump administration has identified. They've set up working groups. Tillerson's been in Europe. Still, the agenda is very large, and it's not clear whether everything will be worked out by May 12th. But according to recent reports, the May 12th deadline might not be such a hard deadline. And if there's at least commitment on the part of the Europeans to deal with the problems, the Trump administration is likely to not leave the deal on May 12th. Just very quickly, what are the main issues with regard to the deal that the Trump administration wants to deal with? Inspections at military facilities, which were not dealt with well by the deal, and I can go into this if there are questions later. The missile issue, which was not covered by the deal, at the insistence of the Iranians. That leaves the field open for the Europeans and the Americans to make their own decisions with regard to Iran's vast and varied missile program and what they might decide to sanction down the road. And the third thing that Trump is very concerned about is the sunset provisions, the fact that this deal has an expiration date. And he's trying to advance an understanding with the Europeans that will be a separate agreement. It won't be opening the JCPOA. It won't be renegotiating. He wants to get a parallel agreement with the Europeans to deal with the missiles and inspections at military facilities, and for that deal to have no expiration date. So that's in broad strokes what he's looking for. Again, I can go into more detail if there are questions. Thank you.